the strategy that is showing a significant amount of positive data is segmentation. And segmentation is very interesting because I think the narrative has always been personalization. The idea of using one-to-one personalization, it's a nothing burger, right?
No e-com brand has got 5 years of customer behavioral data.
If you're a marketer, I think you're left asking, wow, what can we do to actually drive our growth? Because the way that we were doing things before, we just simply cannot continue in that direction.
The hard stuff about building the sort of top of funnel brand awareness, it takes months and months, not years, right?
Bit of a chicken and the egg problem, right? If you can't keep feeding the funnel, you're
Yeah.
only going to remain flat or maybe a little positive, best case scenario. But
Most brands we talk to are missing between 20 and 30% of the purchases that are made on their store.
there's a wild drop in efficiency from meta ad buying.
The average lifespan of what's supposedly a customer cookie, something that persists across sessions, as you say, has plummeted from years to months to days.
But the real value is going to be the products that are served up. You want to serve the right products up to the right people. If someone is perfectly anonymous, how can you actually do anything with that? Again, you ask most marketers about personalization, they start to talk about one-to-one, which
Right.
is just not a viable strategy for top of the funnel, right? For net new acquisition. Now you have what was previously anonymous traffic that you're paying for coming to your website, but you already know something about who these people are.
Whoa,
It's unbelievable.
So welcome to another episode with Littledata. I'm joined today by Brian from Nacelle. Thank you, Brian, for joining us. Perhaps you could start by telling us a bit about Nacelle and your journey with e-commerce.
Yeah, I've been in e-commerce for, a decade and a half now. Really just started as an engineer working for a consulting firm. And as my career grew, I got more and more involved with DTC brands online, particularly on the Shopify platform, and merchants' driven obsession with conversion rate increases and average order value increases. And that has led me through a journey of all sorts of technology that can be leveraged by smart marketers to improve those core metrics. And that really prompted me to start Nacelle about 4.5 years ago now.
Great. And I know Nacelle initially focused on, trying to basically, improve conversion rate by speeding up that storefront experience. Tell me a bit about that sort of journey and how it's where you're at today.
Yeah, I mean, it's really simple, a simple concept. The faster your page loads, the higher your conversion rates will be. I think the data that is out in the ether on this one is tremendous. Really strong support around this, and it's a little nuanced. We all sit down in front of our fancy computers that are on Wi-Fi, in the office, but when you think about the consumer, they're out on their phone and they don't always have the best internet connection. And so when you're shopping and you're trying to navigate, different collections and find the product you're interested, figure out if this brand is right for me or not, it's a real detractor when the page takes too long to load. It's very frustrating. So I think we wanted to solve that problem. And the primary way we were solving that problem, because we saw the data around it, was really through what we call headless architecture. And this idea that you can deliver a page almost instantly was just too attractive to not pursue for most brands that we were working with at the time. I think the fundamental problem with this technology, it's not the concept itself. I think it's that there's a very technical overhead, a very large technical overhead. And I think for teams that don't have a forward-thinking CTO or even are willing to invest money in engineering resources because their business model doesn't work that way, if you will, then I think it's getting harder and harder to reasonably think that approaching a headless architecture is the right thing to do. So I think again this will be reserved for the largest merchants on Shopify Plus, but we were left a little unsatisfied with just that. While we still have some great brands like FTD and stuff using our platform, and it's still something we're growing. We were interested in what else we could do to improve conversion rate that didn't take a heavy technical lift.
Yeah. Yeah, so you say headless works well if you got the in-house team to support it and you can invest in that storefront experience, which, as you say, the largest brands are. Having this in conversation actually couple of weeks ago about the fact that although by volume of merchants, headless Shopify is probably still in the hundreds, maybe
Mhm.
small thousands, but by GMV through Shopify, it may be closing on for sort of half of their value.
It,
So you know,
it could be, and I think um, we're very bullish on the fact that technology is getting better and easier to use. Look, I think one of the beautiful things about Shopify is that it simplifies the operations of managing a web storefront, which is a really complicated thing. This isn't just a website like a blog is. This is really a functioning web app that is quite complex. And the idea that you could, use Shopify as a tool to very easily manage your storefront is a brilliant idea. And I think this is one of the primary factors why Shopify has had so much success in this space, even as they moved up market against, some other competitors that have historically been more quote unquote enterprise. The idea
yep.
that a marketing team can come in and just manage all this and change things around and do it with significant velocity is a factor that just can't be ignored. And what this means is, in a world where COGS are uncertain, tariffs, et cetera, trade, a changing world order on the trade front. Um, I think companies are really cognizant of their COGS, and they should be. And
Mm.
so, is a big investment into headless going deeper down that route, is that the right thing to do or not? And I think the answer comes down to, do you have an engineering tech culture within your company? Is that a big asset of yours? If you don't
Mm.
view that as an asset, or maybe if you outsource that, or maybe if you just think it's kind of an area that just produces COGS without any return, um, you know, you really ought to be thinking about headless before you jump into it. Now, the reason why we're so bullish on the future of headless is technology that brings this to life will get easier and easier to manipulate. And I think a
Mm.
great example that's really relevant in the news. I love this idea of the Horizon AI Shopify theme. Um, you know, First version of everything will have its flaws, so be it. But I think that direction is absolutely brilliant and something that could really lower the barrier to bringing technology that historically you needed a big team to implement down. And yeah,
I
I,
think
I
I
think
think
that yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I think flexibility is a really important word, isn't it? Because as you say, we do live in uncertain times, and so if you're committing yourself to this sort of tech stack where it feels like you might have to change everything up again in 2 years' time, that feels the wrong decision, I think, for many brands. I mean, in some ways, headless can bring flexibility because you do it right, you can, it allows you to sort of iterate on the design. But I hear your point. You've got to design, you've got to optimize in the current climate for what's going to give you kind of immediate return on investment now, and then as you say, tech is moving quickly. Maybe in a few years' time there'll be something better.
Yeah, and I also think great marketers are really good experimenters, meaning they're fantastic at trying something and looking at the numbers and then iterating, which I think, is maybe a good segue into what's going on in the world of analytics and data. But I think the idea that marketers need velocity is really key and essential. They have numbers they have to hit every quarter, and they want to make sure that they're finding something that's working right now that will ensure that they can hit their numbers. And
Yep.
by the way, this is why I think personalization is definitely the new frontier for a lot of Shopify stores, and actually getting this right with AI is something really interesting. It's also why I think the data and how your data flows and how you view your analytics will be equally as important in this new frontier.
Yeah, I mean, before we get into acquisitions in a moment, I mean, I just from my personal experience the last few weeks, actually, looking at how we can accelerate sales as a company, I realized that for a lot of brands, the hard stuff about building the sort of top of funnel brand awareness, it takes months and months, not years, right? So if as a marketer, you can't really turn that lever very quickly. You should be doing brand marketing, of course, but if you actually have to hit numbers, in the next few months, actually better converting people who are already coming to your site is obviously a much quicker lever.
Definitely. I agree with that. And I think this is why retention marketing and all of the great tools that have hit the ecosystem, the e-commerce ecosystem in the last 3 or 4 years have been so tremendous. I mean, I'm thinking Klaviyo attentives of the world. The idea of SMS, I think, was a big trend that still seems to be quite profitable for a lot of companies. And
Yep.
then the classic, the email marketing. I think this is still a very essential piece of the puzzle. But if we look at the history of direct to consumer e-commerce over the last 6 years or so, we got a little backed up because of the privacy changes that happened, iOS 14, 14.5.
Mm.
And what it really did, I think, was ripped out the rug from underneath a lot of marketers whose primary focus was, essentially Meta and partially Google, to acquire, using those platforms to acquire net new customers. And so while you could have retention over the last, 2, 3 years be working really well, what is your primary growth strategy? Because I think the cost of acquisition for a lot of these channels has just decreased so significantly. And there are several of these darling direct-to-consumer brands that I personally love that I'm a big dork about when it comes to it. But if you look at some of these companies that did decide to go public and you look at their stock price, and you look at a 5 year chart, I mean it's horrifying. I also
Yeah.
think in news, you have Nike that made this big push into D2C circa 2017, 2018, and now, I think a couple weeks ago they announced, hey, we're pulling out of this strategy entirely. We're going back to essentially a wholesale model. It didn't work.
Mm.
Um, I think that's probably a little clouded with just what happened with the privacy policy upheaval, but I think it's very interesting. Really, I think it's very important to note what's happening right now.
Yeah.
And if you're a marketer, I think you're left asking, wow, what can we do to actually drive our growth? Because the way that we were doing things before, we just simply cannot continue in that direction.
Yeah, I mean, I think what we saw is obviously, if you sort of quick recap of the last few years, you say iOS 14, I think was 2021, back in 2020, and up until that point, as you say, the meta strategy has been quite simple. You dump dollars in, you see the campaigns perform, number goes up, and there was a kind of then a rude shock, I think, in 2022 when a lot of you know brands then realized that that strategy had gone off the rails. General kind of pullback from Meta. I mean, you look at Meta stock price suffer the time. Hey, is this even a viable channel anymore? And then people have got back into that because it still is with all of their particularly their Instagram property, but still a very very good way to acquire net new consumers. Um, and so I guess the challenge now is how do we make the best of it rather than is there an alternative?
Yeah, and I think what strategies should we be using, both for our analytics to understand, but also for our actual top of funnel growth and our new customer acquisition growth, net new customer acquisition. So putting retention aside for a minute, I think there are, several podcasts and a lot of information out there on retention. In general, I think most e-commerce brands do retention really well.
Yeah,
But it brings us back to this question. I think before this podcast started, you said it's like a bit of a chicken and the egg problem, right? If you can't keep feeding the funnel, you're
yeah,
only going to remain flat or maybe a little positive, best case scenario. But how do we reinvigorate and reignite the growth engine, that maybe we saw, maybe not quite 2021, but maybe 2017, 2018, 2019 would be, I think, a really nice
yeah,
stride to hit for most of these brands.
yep. Yeah, and you wrote a great article for our blog, which I think expresses sort of three sort of phases of the customer life cycle. Obviously you've got the acquisition, you've got the sort of progression. We'll come on to that. It's an interesting bit, taking people from essentially cold to buy ready,
Right.
and then you've got the retention. Where you people have already purchased and you're going to purchase again. And as rightly you say, there's only so much you can do to sort of keep churning out more revenue from existing. So yeah, let's talk through kind of acquisition and then progression. Kind of how do you see, particularly how do you see data feeding into that and helping improve efficiency?
Yeah, I think it's really important to understand that three big things changed with the Apple privacy policy changes. And a quick note on this: some people will counter this and say, "Oh, but Apple is actually not even the majority of mobile market share." So let's just address that quickly. Let's get that one crossed off because this is a quick one. Yes, that's true, but the consumer that's on the iOS device tends to spend about 3 to 4 times more than a consumer on other devices that are out there in the world. So it actually is still reigns king, and the
And
policies
very
they set
dominant
are
in North America, right? I mean, it's still, and
very
that's
dominant in North America. Yeah, yeah,
yeah,
especially for the spend. So marketers really want to find those iOS device consumers, and so they make the rules. Apple's going to make the rules, and that's we have to play by their rules. So okay, so there were three big ramifications I think to what happened here. The first is there's a wild drop in efficiency from Meta ad buying. I don't think this is new news. I think it was a rude awakening to the industry when it happened, but I think it's really compounded into something that's a bit daunting for a lot of brands still today. Um, and the reason why that happened is because, listen, Facebook couldn't follow the consumer across the web the way it could before. So it's just you're not going to get the same degree and level of precise targeting that you had previously. The second thing that happened is very much related to the work you folks do at Littledata, which is um, attribution analytics just really got significantly more difficult to manage. A lot of this has to do really with how cookies work and the retention period is one big factor there. So, even a first party cookie, right? People always say, oh, it's the death of the third party cookie. Well, a first party cookie you used to be able to drop it. It has a retention period over 365 days. Now you can't claim a retention period for more than 7 days. That
mm,
changes how your analytics stack is going to process data and how it's going to work. And how your attribution models will work as well. And then the third thing, and I think this is where things get really interesting, but it's tangentially related to the first issue, which is the decrease in efficiency of Meta. And that is now you need a new strategy and a new playbook for approaching paid ads. And the idea that you can just throw up some ads on Meta and do a lookalike audience and call it a day, let it run and scale. It's not that easy, but essentially that's the high level strategy. I think they're really gone. And so I think, first of all, marketers, media buyers that are skilled at buying media are going to be significantly more valuable than they ever were before. And so, I think if companies are doubling down in marketing, that's a great place to look first. But I also think the strategy that is showing a significant amount of positive data is segmentation. And segmentation is very interesting because I think the narrative has always been personalization. I would say for 16 years, for as long as I've been in e-commerce for. And really, it's one-to-one personalization. So when you talk to personalization with most marketers, they say, "Oh, I'm thinking in my head a Netflix or an Amazon." The problem with both those one-to-one personalization experiences, which are quite good, both of them, is that those two apps have an identity of their user. Essentially, you don't really use Amazon unless you're logged in. You definitely don't use Netflix unless you're logged in. So they have an identity and they have data that is tied to that identity. That is a brilliant thing. The problem that e-commerce marketers face is that when they buy traffic or when they use their marketing campaigns and whatnot, different strategies and channels, the vast majority of that traffic is anonymous. And
yep,
so the idea of using one-to-one personalization, it's a nothing burger, right? You can't do it. You don't know who these people are. And so this idea of segmentation as opposed to one-to-one personalization has really come back into the mix. I remember, some data from retention marketers and retention marketing SaaS platforms that were talking about the significant upgrade even in retention marketing when they would segment emails. That's very interesting. What's more interesting is what can we do to combat this loss in efficiency with Meta? Well, if we can get really good targeted personas and segments in a way that was built for acquisition as opposed to retention, we have a winning formula to really increase our ROAS, our return on advertising spend. So I'll pause there. Yeah.
yeah. No. Lots of good stuff to unpack there. I want to come. I mean, I think the Netflix analogy is a good one, a great one. I mean, that's a product I use daily, and as you say, honestly, Netflix have got 5 years of my viewing history. I mean, no e-com brand has got 5 years of customer behavioral data. It's that would be a gold mine if you had it. So, as you say, it's very easy to do personalization in that context. It's very hard in the context of which you've got a 7 day window of behavior to link together. Um,
Yeah, and even if you have a customer that's purchased from you, if it's past 7 days, you can't tie that data you have on them to who they are because they're coming in most likely as an anonymous visitor. So you have a fundamental issue that makes life a lot harder than Netflix in this regard for
yeah.
personalization. Yeah.
So just Pat, to talk to kind of about how Littledata tries to solve these problems, because I recognise this sort of there's three separate problems here, which we do address, and both of them help the acquisition through Meta and other channels, and also the on-site personalization. So I think the first thing is just what we think of as revenue accuracy. Like a lot of most brands we talk to are missing between 20 and 30% of the purchases that are made on their store. They know they've got that transaction through Shopify, it's in the bank, but it never hits the ad platform because for various reasons the thank you page isn't tracked. Ad blockers, privacy, cookie consent, opt out, these sort of things. And that means that fundamentally the acquisition algorithm is trying to run off, an imperfect view of all your orders. It
Mm.
simply doesn't know that certain ads converted to revenue and others didn't. So that's actually the easiest one to solve. We do that with server-side tracking, and it just means that all of the purchases that come through, even on a headless storefront, we can make sure those are fed through into the platform. The second problem, as you alluded to, is cookies. As you say, the average lifespan of what's supposedly a customer cookie, something that persists across sessions, as you say, has plummeted from years to months to days. And even Apple aside, even on other browsers for various reasons, browsers clearing their cookies after the session, etc. It's now kind of in the weeks. So we can't fix all of that, but what we can do is try and capture the best of the cookies. So that means making sure that where possible we can identify people based off. There are first party cookies and there are first party cookies. They're not all created equal, and basically the ones that are set by the domain itself from a server, those are the kind of the most persistent cookies. And if we can kind of piggyback on those, we can get a better idea this is the same person who visited more than 7 days ago. And then the third trick is something that Meta figured out in 2021 as a response to the intelligent tracking prevention, and Google's followed suit, which is to use that first party customer data to attribute. So to say, look, whatever the cookie, if you know because the customer purchased at edward@littledata.io and they've got their Instagram account in that same email, or their physical address or the phone number, there's various data points you can use, then we can with high certainty say this is the same person. And that also has a brilliant other benefit, which is we can start to do cross-device tracking and
Mm.
understand that the person who viewed the YouTube ad over here is the same person who purchased over here, or the person that viewed the Instagram post here is the same person that here. Now, we probably don't need to get into view-through conversions. I'm reasonably skeptical about view-through attribution, but still, the point is there is another way that can bypass cookies, and I think you'll see platforms like Google and Meta pushing this more and more because the lifespan of cookies is just declining year on year.
Yeah, two responses to that. It's a great point, Ed, and I think first, the go-to Shopify store is like a Snow Devil or a fashion store is always what we think about, as the model in our head. But let's not discount high ticket items. Stores that sell furniture and home goods could
Right.
be maybe $5,000. This is not oh, I saw an ad once and then I went into the store and I did a checkout conversion thing. This is actually a funnel that has to be managed. So the attribution gets so much more important, and using best practices, like server-side attribution, I think is just essential for those types of brands.
Absolutely.
And
Yeah,
yeah,
I actually started my career with it. Well, started Littledata working for a big furniture brand in Europe, Made.com, and that was exactly their problem. They thought that from their measurement around to buy a big $5,000 couch was like a 17 touch point conversion. So
wow.
going back a week is not close to cutting it.
Wow, yeah, yeah. So you have kind of a double whammy, for those types of brands. You have less efficient ads for top of the funnel. And you also have, oh my gosh, I don't even really know what's working in terms of my different strategies inside the funnel because it's so much harder to track.
Yeah, yeah. Sorry, I interrupted
Yeah.
you.
I don't know. I thought that was fine and good.
Um,
Brilliant.
yeah, so I think so yeah, with acquisition we can help fuel it with better data, but again, this also helps the personalization problem. So as you say, the extent to which you can, I mean, let's talk about segmentation, perhaps as you say, not personalization, not one to one, but just even being able to put someone in a bucket that says they should see this product category versus this product category.
Yeah.
The extent to which you do that is the extent to which you can identify this is the same person who came before. And so when someone first lands on your site, you don't know very much about them. They probably are truly anonymous. But basically, the more they interact, maybe they sign up for your newsletter, probably maybe they make a purchase, but they certainly start to add stuff to cart and browse different categories. This is the point at which we can start, and Littledata can add value in terms of linking together those customer touch points back to a single unified profile. Now, that's not necessarily, we think of Littledata kind of identified profile, people who actually, we know this is Edward, they've given us their email or so on, but it could just be an anonymous, cookie ID, but just one that includes more touch points, more sessions, more browsing behavior. Because then at least you can know, for example, if I came back last week and I was browsing, I'm a pet food store, I was browsing dog food, you can point me towards dog food rather than cat food. Simple kind of segment example.
Yeah, and I think this is a brilliant strategy for remarketing. So retargeting ads and making sure that you're doing that really well and really efficient. I think this is I think brands that aren't thinking that way that you just proposed that are probably leaving money on the table and missing a lot of opportunity. And I think it's a great strategy. Um,
Actually, the other
yeah.
example, just on the pet food theme, was actually one I heard from another partner recharge a few months ago, which is that you can, if you can know that this person who's on your storefront is already a subscriber, you can immediately switch the messaging of what you're trying to push them. So with a lot of subscription brands, what you're actually trying to do is get them to purchase one time to start with, and then convert them to a subscription, once they're sold on the product. Dog food being a great example of something that you need on a regular basis. We have a recharge powered dog food subscription in this household. And okay, so the challenge there is, again, just do you know this is the same person? Because they haven't logged into your storefront. But if you can, through better identity resolution, understand that I'm a one-time purchaser who hasn't, then you can immediately push up the message to be subscribe. And for this brand that had done that in the UK, that had very impressive results. Just that one data point, were they a previous purchaser or not, enable them to just tailor that offer to what was their next best action.
Yeah, I think that's brilliant. I mean, what a wonderful play. I also even for companies that I subscribe to, and now this granted is more on the retention side, but if I can relate, I'm a subscriber to Farmer's Dog, and my dog's been on it since he was like 3 or something, and they'll cross sell. So when I land on the site, they'll cross sell into this idea that maybe they won't Finn, my dog wants to try some new treats that they have on their menu, and so should we add this to your subscription box? If
Yeah,
you have the sophistication to pull something off like that, you have a clear competitive advantage in the marketplace. I think it's brilliant. Yeah.
yeah.
Now
And
I
I
would
think
say in
also
terms of the
consumers love smart recommendations. Like they don't, it doesn't
right.
feel creepy if it's actually something you generally were looking for.
That's right, and I think when we talk about personalization, this is the other thing that trips people up. Um, a lot of marketers say, "Oh, okay, we want to change the messaging and stuff," and I think that's very important. If you can do that, it's wonderful. But the real value is going to be the products that are served up. You want to serve the right products up to the right people, and I think if you can do that strategically, you're gonna be that's the big lever you can pull. The messaging is important, but do get the right products up first and then do the messaging as a second tier. A lot of personalization projects take way too long to do, over a year or two, and are wildly expensive. We just had a case study done on a merchant that spent almost $2 million and took 15 months to get up and running with an incumbent personalization provider. And by the end of it, by the end of their 15 months and their $2 million, they could segment between people that have been to the store before and people that hadn't. So these are the kinds of value traps I think you want to look out for. And that's actually why we created the three-stage framework at Nacelle when it comes to personalization. And I think it overlays with what we were just talking about. If you think about the example you gave with a return visitor, I would
Yeah.
actually put that into stage two of our funnel. So the first stage is the brand new visitor. Okay, they're completely anonymous. You really, unless you're going to maybe use some of the things we talk about on this podcast, generally that historically has been not an area that you could do too much with in terms of segmentation. The second stage is what we call the progressive stage, and that's what you just described. We know a little something about this person, and therefore could be really lucrative. And I think that is uh, really where merchants that are using your solution are going to absolutely shine. I love the example with the recharge merchant and the dog food. I think that's such a home run. If more brands can do that, it is a clearly low hanging fruit, and it is clearly a great way to start to drive more conversions profitably on your storefront. And then I think the third is what we're all intimately familiar with, which is the idea of stage three being retention. Look, we already know who this customer is. We have some data on them. When they sign into the Shopify store, we can look at their order history and make recommendations based on that. That's your classic Amazon play. The problem is, how often does that happen? And with, the cookies getting their retention time being shorter and shorter, that's going to be a harder strategy to depend on. To us, the real opportunity that hasn't been uncovered yet is in that first stage, the purely anonymous visitor. What can you actually do to bring some segmentation strategies into that stage? And I think when we first started to explore this topic, it was a bit of a paradox. If someone is perfectly anonymous, how can you actually um, do anything with that? And it wasn't really until modern AI came into the mix that we were able to think about this with a different lens. At Nacelle, and by the way, this applies to headless merchants, but also non-headless merchants using this technology as well. So it works in both. But what we did is we trained a model, her name's Paige, and she learns about your store. She connects to your store. She learns about your product catalog. And the first thing merchants do is they engage in a two-way conversation with Paige about what I think is the most important for most marketers, which is the brand voice. So
Okay.
Paige is going to understand your brand voice, understand your product catalog,
Mm.
and understand some order patterns. And then you're going to engage in a segmentation conversation. And this is where she starts to use behavior that gets taken on the website in the mix of her total data set. And she's going to propose about five or six different segments, personas that you can start to target for your top of the funnel. Now, like the brand voice, this is a two-way conversation. But Paige was also trained on how one buys ads in Meta and Google. And so what she does is she starts to come up with personas that match your brand that you will be able to very easily target when you go to buy your ads in Meta. And so instead of just hitting the autopilot on Meta, you're still depending on Meta's technology to do its magic, which, by the way, it's still very good at this. But you're giving it some very strong guide rails that I think previously you didn't have if you weren't using the segmentation technique. And the real magic comes when you make these campaigns and you use what we call a smart URL. So instead of just sending people to a landing page or your homepage or a collection or what have you, you're going to do just that, but you're going to put almost like a little UTM style parameter at the
Yeah.
end, and that's going to inform Page what segment this customer is in. So
Yep.
now you have what was previously anonymous traffic that you're paying for coming to your website, but you already know something about who these people are. You know
Right.
what they tend
So
to add to
you
their
use the
cart.
demographics from Meta effectively to set that.
That's right.
Understood.
So,
Right.
and I think this is relevant to how you think about the world too, Ed. Um, if you think about this setup, what you're effectively doing is saying, okay, Meta, I want you to get these people. And what we'll do is we'll pay you. The value exchange is simply we'll pay you for the identification of these people, not specifically who they are, but know that they fall into the segment
Yeah.
range. And in return, we'll pay you for it. And so that's really what you're doing in an ad transaction when you use this model. Now, when this, you know, only semi-anonymous traffic comes in, you don't know exactly who they are, but you know they fall into this category. You could do all sorts of wonderful things in terms of product recommendations and messaging. And I
Yeah.
think this is really where merchants that implement a strategy like this and have little data, now they're going to be able to move so many top of the funnel anonymous visitors further down the funnel so
Yep.
much faster. And I think it could be a really great thing.
So it's a really interesting topic. I mean, I think obviously the quite a lot of marketers have been trying to do this for a long time, right? The idea of sort of dynamic landing pages for different ad campaigns. What are the challenges doing at scale? I mean, where do you think AI sort of helps do this well?
Well, the first thing is I think consultants have always done this where they'll go in and they'll
Yeah.
learn about a brand and kind of figure out, okay, maybe this segment or this segment. I think really good marketers have done this. But the problem is so few people understand why this is important. Again, you ask most marketers about personalization, they start to talk about one-to-one, which
Right.
is just not a viable strategy for top of the funnel, right? For net new acquisition. So I think this is just a secret that's been known by a small bit of people, and I think they charge phenomenal amounts of money to come in and build some personas with you so that you can target. And so I think AI is a liberation of that. I think it's able to bring that to the SMBs of the world, to the Shopify merchants, and really say, hey, look, this model was trained the way one of those high-end consultants would be, and we're going to try this. I think the other nice thing about AI that I think makes it really scalable and why we needed AI to really do this is it can also learn from the data coming in. So if a smart URL is used, that whole session, that journey will be tagged with that particular segment. And so Paige starts to learn over time which segments are working and which aren't. And she
Yeah.
can engage in a conversation with the marketer. Hey, it looks like this thing's working, but not this one. Should we tweak this in any way? And let's have a conversation about it. I think that's really hard to do without modern AI today. So
Yeah.
I think it's a big change. Yeah.
Well, it's
Yeah.
also the resonance with the landing page. Because the classic problem with ads is like, you could have good click through, but if the landing page doesn't resonate with what the ad was sort of the angle of the ad, then it's not going to work. They're not going to go further down
It's
the
the most
funnel.
important thing. I mean, you could spend millions of dollars on ad spend just to send people to a landing page that doesn't resonate with them,
Yeah.
and you're gonna have a bad return on that investment. I think D2C brands have a very unique challenge. It's not just the conversion. It's also really customer lifetime value. How do you actually get a customer to repeatedly buy from you?
Sure.
Even if you're not subscription, if your subscription is a little more obvious, but even if you're not, for example, how do you even plunge into the idea of a subscription? There's a piece that I think most the marketers that are most impressed with in the Shopify ecosystem, they understand identity. They understand not only how to convert a customer to buy the product from paid ads, but they also understand how to speak to them in a way that says, "Hey, this brand, this is for you." And I think
Mm.
that's the really important bit. If you can use segmentation, you can use language, imagery, and general marketing that for that particular niche within your target audience speaks directly to them. And so
Yeah.
now you're talking about not just a one-time conversion, like a cheap set up a shop and import something and sell it, but you're talking about now building brand value and imprinting that identity and associating it with the identity of the consumer. And I think
Mm.
that's really when customer lifetime value starts to see some big lifts as well as conversion.
Yeah, it's actually one of the probably the most underutilized use cases for Littledata is we track the customer lifetime value as a custom dimension to Google Analytics, and you can use that in two ways. One is to sort of understand what is the behavior of people who are buying repeatedly from you, subscription brand or just one-time purchases. But you can also use it as an audiences and go along to Google Ads and actually now
Right.
increasingly Meta ads and use that to say, right, find me more of these high-value people. Because as you said, that was one of the things that broke about Meta a few years back is that that ability to do the lookalike audiences of my of my top customers and find more like them. That's much harder to do with a lookalike audience, but it is possible to do by kind of audience sharing from Google Analytics.
It's also a critical metric for marketers to know. If you don't have an idea of your customer lifetime value, how do you know how much to spend on new customer acquisition?
Right, right. I made this point over the years is that, as you say,
Yeah.
if you're a subscription brand, you clearly that your willingness, your customer acquisition cost should be more than the first subscription value. You'd expect people to be subscribing for 3 or 4 purchases minimum, and so but the extent at which you're willing to go beyond 2 or 3 times monthly spend is the extent at which you can really measure that repeat purchasing months down the line. And I know brands would typically take a kind of a snapshot look at that. Obviously, you may not have history to know whether people are really going to be subscribing for years, but it's certainly important to know for a given cohort, as you say, how what is the true lifetime value and what could you spend to acquire.
Yeah, I think this is going to be a key metric for every marketer in the direct-to-consumer space over the
Yeah.
next 5 years. It's just essential. Yeah.
I've sort of been in this space for 8 years now, and I'm sort of amazed that isn't already the case. But my thesis is still the same, which is that over time, DTC in every given niche becomes just more and more competitive. Like there's, your only real edge is if you can use data better than the next brand to more target and profitably acquire new business. And so I just think that over time, people who are not using these techniques to target, to acquire, to convert, are going to get swamped by people who are. They're just going to get outcompeted in terms of acquisition spend.
Yeah, and I'll add to that. I think, in the lush period before the privacy policy changes, I think it was so, I won't use the word easy, but it was so, you could be so profitable by just buying ads. Did you really have to track all those metrics? I mean, look, we're making money hand over fist. We're growing like, a weed.
Yeah,
Is that really like the most important thing that I do today? Now when reality hits and, some of those clever tricks that Meta and Google were using to get really targeted disappears. Now it's still, I would make the argument, I think you would too, that that was always an important metric to track. But now it really matters because if you don't understand how much you could spend to acquire a customer, um, yeah, I don't know how you compete in the ad space. I don't know how you know what to buy and at what price.
yep. All right. Well, I think that's all we've got time for today. But that's been super interesting chatting, Brian. I do wish you well with Page. I think it's an
Thank you.
excellent
Yeah.
concept to try to make it, as you say, easier to do. Yeah, like a lot of software tools, it's automating something that maybe a smart marketing consultant would have done for you, but making it accessible for every brand just to be able to add this to their storefront. That sounds fantastic. Um,
If I can, I think, Page is a free trial, so you can do 21-day free trial. If you have a Shopify store, that's really what she was made for today. I think in the future we might think about other platforms, but right now it's Shopify. You don't have to be headless. This works on headed, if you will, stores and regular Shopify 2.0 themes. But yeah, 21-day free trial, free install. We don't ask for a credit card up front. And she'll make the segments with you and get to work with you. And if you decide not to go on further, no harm, no foul. But it's a ton of fun. And yeah, I encourage people to give the free trial a go and at least have a conversation and see what you can learn because we're also very impressed with some of the strategies that she comes up with.
yeah,
Sometimes we're like, oh, well, we didn't think of that. I suppose we'll put that on the blog post or something. It was clever. So yeah, I think yeah, it's really cool to see how she interacts with different brands and
yeah.
the uniqueness that comes out through conversation with the marketers is very cool.
I must say, I had one of those moments today where someone's just blown away by how AI has progressed. We were trying to optimize something on our own paywall, and I basically asked ChatGPT, kind of, I gave it a screenshot and just asked how to do better. And honestly, it just came back with a fully developed HTML of like how it would lay out the page and why.
Incredible.
And it was
Yeah.
just like, whoa, like
It's it's
I,
it's unbelievable, isn't it? Yeah.
I've
Yeah.
hired loads of designers and product managers over the years that have taken months to come up with similar sort of feedback.
What a
Anyway,
world we live in. Yeah.
yeah,
Pretty incredible.
awesome. Well, thanks for coming on the show, and I look forward to working more with you, Brian.
Likewise. Thanks so much for having me, Ed.